Hello and welcome to At the Power Table podcast, where we are bringing you the people breaking barriers and building the future. I am so excited today because today we're chatting to Lidia Garces Marcuello, a absolute powerhouse in the industry and one of my closest friends. I have so much love for her. Lidia and I met in consulting where we worked together on a number of projects, and you can tell from the conversation we've had a number of debates/arguments, but all healthy and loving, of course. And to this day, we remain friends. Lidia and I chat about the blackouts in the Iberian Peninsula. So Lidia was in Spain at the time, and she gives us a first-hand account from her perspective on how people reacted, which is not quite what I was expecting. And then we speak through changes in the energy system and what we need going forward. It's a fascinating conversation, and it's one I truly enjoyed, and I hope you do too. As always, if you do enjoy or if you don't enjoy, please leave us comments and also like, follow, subscribe, and all of those good things, and please share us with your network too. Okay, enjoy. Bye. I'm so excited to have the most specialist person. Specialist, is that a word? Definitely. Special because she means so much to me. Lidia Garces Marcuello is in the house today talking to us at the Power Table podcast. Lidia, thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. It's so exciting what you're doing with the podcast. As your close friend and old colleague, it's super exciting to see you doing something like this.
What a treat to have you. Lidia, tell us about what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a consultant at ERM, which is a global sustainability consultancy. It's all they do. And before that, I was more in strategy consulting at Deloitte, but my background has always been in sustainability. I have around 5 years of experience in the sustainability consulting space. And in terms of studies, when I went to uni, I didn't know what I wanted to study. I knew I was really interested in sustainability. And it's funny because now sustainability is quite mainstream. But when I was looking at uni degrees, sustainability was just starting to be a thing. So there weren't like specialized degrees like the specialized degrees that you see now in sustainability didn't exist. So I came across this interdisciplinary degree called Arts and Sciences, which basically lets you study modules across the university. So anything from like engineering to arts, politics and philosophy. So anything really. So I chose that because it essentially allowed me to study sustainability from different angles, which is ultimately what sustainability is, different perspectives. So I studied that, and then I did a master's called environmental technology. The name is misleading. Doesn't really have anything to do with technology, but it was mostly around corporate sustainability. So that's how I got into the corporate sustainability space, and then consulting was kind of the natural next step from my master's, and I've been pretty happy in the consulting space so far.
Oh, what a treat. I'm so jealous that you had a build your degree, build your degree off. What a treat. I wish I had that, though I don't know if I would know what I wanted. I studied accounting. At that point in my life, I really loved it. So,
and it's good that you knew what you wanted to study. I mean, I was so overwhelmed by not knowing. It's good to have clarity.
To be fair, I don't think I knew I wanted to study accounting. I just knew it was my favorite subject. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. I'll continue in my studies in accounting. Tell us about sustainability. Love that the fact that there was no sustainability degree then, but it's now become a buzzword. But it's also such a buzzword that you don't really know what it is or what does it mean. So tell us in your perspective what sustainability means.
Well, I like the quote traditional definition for sustainability, which comes from the definition of sustainable development from the Brundtland Commission, which I forget the formal definition, but in short, it just means that you leave the planet in the same way that you found it, and where that's not possible, you make efforts to restore it or offset the impact that you've had. So it's basically about leaving the system in equilibrium and undoing any negative or unavoidable impact that you have.
That's really interesting. Make that real first with an example, a sustainability project that you've worked on.
Well, in sustainability consulting, I would say most of the projects that I work on now are essentially helping companies to understand what their risks and opportunities and impacts are related to sustainability. And through that assessment, they basically understand where their material or most important impacts are. And then based on that, they can strategically make plans to address and offset those impacts, and then go beyond that to leave even more positive change on the environment or the society where they're having an impact.
That's really cool. And do companies really care about sustainability? What would you say the attitudes are?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, in my opinion, the short answer is no. Based on my experience in consulting, I've seen, business is business, and things like shareholder obligations and the current state of policy will always take priority. And it makes sense, right? That's the business atmosphere, and you can't push for sustainability without understanding a company's specific context, not only how a company works, but also the sector that it's in, the policy that it has to work around. So I try to take a very rational and realistic approach to sustainability. Sustainability is not black and white. We're not going to get anywhere with sustainability by pushing a black and white agenda. It's very colored according to company and sector context. So based on that context, I think the short answer is no. Then there are examples, and I have seen through my projects companies moving in the right direction of sustainability. I do a lot of work in the energy sector, and you do see examples of companies pushing towards the energy transition. But like I said, there's ultimately down to the business context. And I think a big example we're seeing in the consulting space now is the change in regulation and how that's driving sustainability efforts. So in the EU, there's a regulation known as the CSRD, which is Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and it's essentially been driving business in the consulting space because a lot of companies are in scope and basically will need to have CSRD aligned reports in the next few years. So that's been driving a lot of projects, but the European Commission came out a few months ago with an omnibus package. An omnibus package basically packages a bunch of different regulations into one to try and simplify it. And they said that they were going to postpone the CSRD by a few years. So a lot of the clients have decided to delay the projects that they were doing. And because the thing about the CSRD can be misconstrued as just a reporting obligation, but to disclose the data that the CSRD requires, you need to have policies, you need to have strategies and actions in place in order for that data to exist and that information to exist. So the CSRD was seen as a great sort of segue to sustainability strategy, policies, and actions. And that being delayed, companies are no longer as incentivized to put that in place. So I think that's a really strong example of how business ultimately follows the policy environment and the environment that makes sense. So back to my original answer, short answer, no. But do I think that's simply because they don't care enough? No, I think it's because of the whole context.
I am taken aback. This is such a diplomatic answer from you.
Being in sustainability, there are a lot of strong voices and a lot of voices that talk about sustainability as if it's black and white, and it's not. Ultimately, if you want to transform around sustainability, it needs to be aligned to how the business operates and its environment outside. Otherwise, sustainability isn't going to be sustainable if you don't align it with how the company is needing to respond to external factors. So, yeah.
That's an incredible viewpoint, and I think it touches so much on the trade-offs. There's always trade-offs. I think we should change the name of this podcast just to be like the trade-off conversation, because that's all we talk about. It's the trade-offs of oh yes, I want to be sustainable and I want to be this business who cares, but I also am a business, and so you need to be commercially sensitive to the decisions that you're making. I don't know if you're going to kill me for sharing, but we've definitely had multiple conversations, almost arguments about sustainability.
I think back then I still had that perspective of it needs to be in the business context, but you also need to be ambitious and push for it. And wait, sorry, I cut you off. Did you want to talk about this? I think I would love to see a world where businesses fight for a trade-off where sustainability wins and just take the chance on sustainability and see where it goes. Again, if the case isn't there, that they're not going to do it.
It's a fair challenge to businesses to be, let's take a trade-off and let sustainability win. The example that always comes to my head is Patagonia. They've picked sustainability over business, which is really, really cool. And I think they are companies who are doing it. But I think what we need, and what you're saying, is we need the big companies, like the companies who are changing whatever businesses decisions they're making based on, for example, CSRD, like take a chance in sustainability. Like if you had the project, just keep going.
Exactly.
And I think there are businesses who are doing it, but not the majority of it. Tell us about your experience in the energy industry and sustainability.
Yeah. So I kind of fell into energy projects through consulting and realized that I really liked it and just stayed in that space for the last few years, which I've been very lucky to do, because in consulting, especially early on in your career, you don't necessarily get to choose what projects you're on all the time. But it started with a really big project with a global oil major to help them redefine their sustainability priorities. It was like 6 or 7 months long, which is very long for this strategy consulting project. What I realized I really enjoyed about the oil and gas or energy sector more broadly, as I discovered later, is the combination of technical and strategic thinking. I think you can say that for any sector, but particularly appealed to me here because of the tangible impact that the energy sector has on the environment and society. It's something very visible, very measured, and understood by society, and that makes it really interesting because there's a lot of data and illustrative examples behind the impact. And so having that technical perspective and translating it to a strategic lens was super interesting, because ultimately, to drive decisions, they need to be backed by data, but they need to be strategically phrased and presented to incentivize people to make decisions. So that combination of thinking was super interesting to me. And then chemistry and biology have always been my favorite subjects since school, or they were my favorite subjects in school. And getting to see that data in these projects just took me back to school and was super fascinating. To see these huge companies just boiled down to these data points was, very fascinating to me. So that was my first energy project in oil and gas. And then I did a few related to the power sector, so distribution and transmission. And again, the combination of technical and strategic. So there, I didn't know anything about power, and now I pass a substation on the motorway and I'm like, oh my gosh, I know what that does. And it's just crazy to me that I learned all that through a desktop project in consulting. And I really enjoyed that, getting to know these complex engineering concepts and the translation of these concepts into the real world. So the power sector projects I did was a nice continuation. Then another thing I realized I enjoyed about the energy sector, specifically through the power related projects I did, was, and maybe this is just because I was on those projects, so these things became more visible to me, but just how present these topics are in national policy. And again, that link to the real world context, to learning about government and civil society and how everything is related. This was specific to the UK context because this is where I did the projects at the time, but I learned a lot about UK energy policy and also how it relates to global policy. I enjoyed it for the real world applications that it has and learnings that it has. And because of the technical aspects, I felt like I was always learning something completely unrelated to consulting or strategy, and something that you're going to remember because it has real world applications.
That's really cool and a really, really compelling answer. Like, I'd be surprised if someone doesn't be like, I want to be what she's doing. But it's a great segue into The Great Betrayal.
The Great Betrayal.
The Great Betrayal, where Lydia left London to go to Barcelona and left me alone. So, Lydia, talk to us about your transition and how you broke my heart. Go on.
I'll make up for it one day. And being back in London this weekend has been tempting.
Good.
I won't fall for it.
No, Lydia, come back.
I don't think I can stomach another move in 12 months. But yeah. So just moving to Barcelona, I moved for personal reasons. I'm Spanish, but I've never lived in Spain. So I really wanted to have that experience. And then professionally, also the role at ERM was available in Spain. So it was kind of a perfect alignment of where I wanted my career to continue, and also just the personal experience that I wanted to have. And ERM is quite different to my previous role at Deloitte because it only does sustainability. So that's what they're known for. They're originally well, I think they're mostly known as an engineering and very technical consultancy. So boots on the ground, going to measure impacts, site remediation, stuff like that. But I work in the corporate sustainability and climate change team, which is essentially the equivalent of any consulting strategy team, but we work solely on sustainability topics.
That is awesome. And teach us about the Spanish energy system. What are some of the challenges, opportunities?
Well, Spain is one of the leaders in the European Union for renewable energy. The government since 2018 has been rolling out a plan to transition fully to renewables by 2030, I think it is. I think around 60 to 70% of the grid is renewables. So they're really pushing on that agenda despite changes in governments over the years. So that's very impressive. And I'm quite proud to be from and living in a country that invests so much in renewables.
That is very cool.
Sorry, I didn't fully answer your question in terms of challenges. I think we'll get into this, but the blackout. I'll like ask the question.
No, go for it. Tell us about the blackout.
Yeah. So when I think about the main opportunities or the main strengths of the Spanish energy system, it's obviously the renewables, but in terms of challenges, so a few weeks ago on the 28th of April, Spain had a national level power outage. It was quite the experience. I mean, to preface this topic, there are societies and countries that live through blackouts sometimes every day. So this is just like my experience of never having lived through this before, and obviously the shock that comes with that. But it was a very privileged experience of a blackout. But I was on a Teams call with colleagues in Portugal. I was in Barcelona, and some of my other colleagues were in Madrid. And my Teams call cut off, and I knew they were doing works in my building that day. So I noticed that the power had gone out, but I didn't think anything of it. So just connected through hotspot, got back on the Teams call and saw nobody else was on it. And slowly people started coming back on it. And these were colleagues in Portugal and Madrid. And they were like, the power went out. I was like, what? It also went out here. And then I looked outside and saw that the traffic lights were off and the traffic was still circulating. And I was like, okay, this is weird. And then I went on the news and there was nothing. And then, as one does in these situations, is go to X and then try and see what people are saying. And everyone was just saying power's out in here and there in completely different places across Spain and Portugal. And we couldn't find a response until many hours. I mean, there's still no official response. Couldn't find what the reason was, and then lost 3G as well. So was fully off the grid for about 12 hours, got the power back at like 1 a.m. the next day. And yeah, it was quite the experience of trying to get in touch with people and just the messages not delivering and not knowing where they were, if they were okay, or just going out into the street and like there's absolutely no lights, but people are behaving business as usual, which was for me the most incredible part. I mean, people came together for it in terms of coming together outside and doing activities outside of it, make the day go by. But everyone remained really calm and composed. And I was pretty impressed with that because it was a bit apocalyptic, specifically because we had no information. Like we had information explaining that there was a blackout for XYZ reason. I understand the composure, but we had absolutely nothing.
That's actually interesting. I thought it would be the other way around. I thought people would be running panic because everything cuts off, your internet cuts off, and you don't know when it's going to come back on. You have no information. So I thought people would be losing their minds.
Me too. No, people were really, really relaxed and respectful. I went to a supermarket to get some things. And at one point, the head of the supermarket decided to close and not let more people in. And the people that tried to get in were like, okay, have a good day. And I'm like, that's so, like, you don't know when the next time is that you can buy something. Not to be dramatic, but kind of. And you're just so chill. It was heartwarming. And in terms of seeing humanity at a moment like this, it was really nice.
That is pretty beautiful. I think like it's really nice to get that perspective. Actually, it wasn't as terrible because once the power came back on, what you immediately seen is the the naysayers being like, oh, it's all renewables' fault because Spain is 65%, 64%. And so everyone's like, we shouldn't change to renewables. Yeah. Backtrack on energy transition and let's go back to fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I think that's partly why the government is so hesitant to give an answer. Well, there is a technical committee that's doing a study on what happened, and the government has said it might be a few weeks before we get the final answers on that. But I think there is a lot of hesitation around explaining that it's likely because the grid is so dependent on renewables, because to the average layperson that is just a reason to go against renewables. It's obviously, as you know, not as simple as it being dependency on renewables, but rather that grid upgrades and investment in the grid to keep up with that dependency on renewables has not been matched. And there was a study by Bloomberg a few weeks ago. Basically, I forget the statistics right now, but Spain in the EU, the ratio of spending on renewables versus spending on grid infrastructure is the lowest across the EU. So if the grid isn't being upgraded to deal with the intermittent, how do you say that word?
Intermittency.
That and the storage issues and all of the requirements that dependency on renewables comes with, then obviously there will be issues. And there's been a lot of external analysis done by research groups and private transmission companies in Spain. And the main theory is that there was an over-reliance on renewables at one point, and that made the grid overwhelmed, basically. And because renewables don't have the same level of inertia as fossil fuel driven energies do, so like gas turbines and the turbines in nuclear plants, that lack of inertia essentially meant that the imbalance was unable to be restored. And then as a protective mechanism, basically the whole grid shuts off. And the transmission operator, the Spanish transmission operator, wasn't able to control it, is the long story short.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's similar. I mean, obviously, we're speculating because there hasn't been an official announcement in terms of what has happened. But I think there's definitely those lessons learned, and I think the most important one is exactly what you're saying. That grid infrastructure investment is necessary, and grid infrastructure investment is one, upgrading from renewables to renewables, and then two is upgrading just the infrastructure, because it's been years since we've upgraded infrastructure. And then there's that third layer of we need to have grid stability, we need to have grid flexibility, we need to have real-time inertia measurement, that next level of research and innovation included in the system. I've also had stuff around, like you've mentioned, the energy storage and like how do we build in extra mechanisms whenever there isn't that stability.
Yeah, no, totally. And going back to the conversation about why the energy sector is so interesting, when this blackout happened, I mean, obviously there's still no official explanation, and I didn't have any information at the time because it was completely cut off. But it was really interesting to have had the experience of working on transmission projects in the UK specifically, and learning about all the policy reforms through those projects, and grid stability being such a huge risk facing the transmission companies that you and I were working with together. And so all of that theory and knowledge during this situation was really interesting to have, because it helped understand what was happening. And then when the first analyses came out, being able to understand what that meant in layman's terms, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a true privilege. And speaking of privilege, you started it with prefacing your context, and probably reasons why you're one of the people I love the most is because you recognize that privilege. And just take a step back and recognize, actually, it is such a privilege to have had that inconvenience, because it is an inconvenience to the Iberian Peninsula, whereas in some countries that's the norm or the standard. In South Africa, we have something called load shedding. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but basically it's a period of time where you don't have electricity, and it is what it is. You just don't have electricity. Yeah. And sometimes it comes on at the same time they said it's going to come on, sometimes it doesn't. And then I think also just kudos to the Iberian Peninsula for how quickly they responded. One of the new things I've learned through the discussions of the blackouts is black start. You know what that is?
No, I don't know.
It's basically how many days or how long does it take for a country if you black out, or you get to start up again. The UK, I think, is around, and I probably needed to fact check this before I shared this information, but it's around 12 to 13 days.
The UK.
Yeah. And so for the Iberian Peninsula to have picked it up within a day, 24-hour turnaround, that's really impressive.
Do you know how has the UK had a national level blackout?
I don't think the UK have a national level blackout, or at least not to my knowledge. I don't really know like the history of blackouts in the country. A bit I'm reading, I suppose, but some really smart people who are very technically inclined, they have like, okay, if X has to go wrong, this is what would happen and this is how long it would take us. So in their scenario planning, they have, this is the average amount of days we would need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that is, I didn't know that stat. That is very interesting. Well, yeah, kudos to Spain. Kudos to the Spanish transmission operator.
Sadly, another reason for you to be proud of the Spanish people and not come back to London. It's okay. I will live. One of the things you've also said that I really liked is you just recognizing the fact that you were able to understand the information and understand what is happening given your experience. I would like to think from a general community perspective. So people who don't have that experience, like my mom, for example. My mom, she always gets part of these examples. But like my mom has no energy experience yet. What did you think that news and that communication and that narrative was managed from a general public perspective?
How it was done in Spain. I think they didn't even try to explain it. They just prefaced it with, this is not the fault of renewables. This is not the fault of our energy system. Our grid is extremely stable and strong. But that leaves room for debate, because you can't say that there is yet no evidence to explain what happened and then say that it wasn't because of renewables. So you need to find a middle ground where, it's very difficult to explain this, and if you don't have the months of learning the theory behind it. But I think it needs to be more of a middle ground of saying we don't have the full evidence and we don't want to give a formal explanation about what happened without knowing, in order to avoid unnecessary panic and debate. That makes a lot of sense. But it needs to be more neutral than not putting the blame on something just because you don't want people to debate it. Saying that it wasn't the fault of renewables to avoid people debating when there's no empirical evidence, it's caused a debate, basically.
Wait, so what are you saying? That they shouldn't have said that? They should just let people debate whether or not it was renewables?
No, I think it should have been a more neutral response of, renewables have allowed our country to do ABC, but there are things about renewables that still need to be addressed, such as XYZ, and we are working on those. But saying fully that it's not because the grid relies on renewables when you don't have empirical evidence for that. And the theory suggests that, data suggests that the grid investment has not kept up with the investment in renewables, and that's an important data point to explain. But how you would explain that to the general public, I don't know.
I don't know. My brain is doing calculations and I'm like,
explain transmission in easy terms. No, please tell me, what do you think?
I don't know. I think like if you don't tell the general public, actually, no, it's not renewables, we're still figuring it out, because that's the message I'm getting. It's not renewables, we're still figuring it out. If you don't say that, then everyone's going to be like, hate renewables, don't want to pay for it, go back to fossil fuels, because obviously renewables in the state we're in currently is increasing energy bills because you're paying for this great grid upgrade. So it's an increase for an average consumer. If I was an average consumer who had no electricity knowledge and all my interaction with electricity is I pay for it every month, I would like latch on to is renewables, make it go down immediately.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think it would have been nice to have more of a technical explanation, which doesn't help answer how you would explain it to the general public. There's obviously data around what happened, like some sort of insights that you can extract from that, and just giving a high level explanation to what could have happened, I think would would avoid some of the debate that is happening now in the Spanish government, because it's been maybe 3 weeks now and there's no advancement on what happened. I think at this point, when it's been a national level blackout, there needs to be some sort of clues.
Yeah, I think what you're calling for is greater transparency,
Mhm.
and it's honest transparency. It doesn't have to be, here's the answer, but just tell us where you're at in the process or what the potential hypothesis is. From my understanding, it's going to take 6 months to get the report out.
Spanish government is slow, so possibly. They said a
Yeah.
few weeks, but that could easily
Yeah.
be months.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I think transparency is key, because another thing that I learned through this experience is that ultimately people are at the center of it, and we, during that blackout, we were all in this together. We were all experiencing the same thing, but it really showed that people need to be at the heart of the energy transition, because you can't have, again, coming from a point of privilege, you can't have unexpected blackouts in the middle of the day. I mean, that's extremely dangerous. There's official deaths linked to the blackout in Spain, and I'm shocked that there were, I think it's three officially. I think it's incredible that there's not more, because think about all the people that were in the middle of a surgery or something. Of course, there's generators, but if you don't anticipate that a blackout's going to happen, you don't have that much capacity. And a lot of hospitals and other important civil society centers had to request backup generators because they just weren't prepared for that. And I think that's extremely dangerous and scary. And I think for me, it showed that people are at the center of the energy transition, and you need to have society in the focus of everything that you're doing related to the energy transition. And so transparency is key. And even if you don't have answers, like you said, hypotheses or initial insights are critical, because this is people's lives that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question I ask almost every single guest. If you were to redesign the energy system, and it could be the Spanish one, the UK one, global, take your pick, but no constraints. So no money constraints, no policy constraints, no anything, no constraints. What would be the changes you would make?
I would do it so that people have more autonomy and control over the energy that they use. I think people would be a lot more careful with their energy use, or responsible with it. So tangibly, what does this mean? Everyone has a solar panel or a wind turbine in their backyard. And I mean, this is a model that exists already, but it's more of the theory that appeals to me, just more independence and individual control, because I think that would bring a society that's more resilient, because you're not depending on a few centralized locations. People are more responsible, more thinking ahead as well, more planning around it. If there's things like blackouts, it's easier to get started when you have your own thing, rather than having to restart the whole energy system. And also energy trading comes from that, because you have autonomy over your own energy and how you can swap that with people. And yeah, I just like the idea of sharing more. You share in the energy system, and I think that will make it stronger and more resilient.
So let me understand what you're saying. You're saying like everyone has their own solar or wind. So everyone has their own supply, X amount of gigawatts per household, depending on like number of occupancy.
Yeah.
And you have to manage that kind of like an energy salary, like you get X.
Yeah.
And then you have to manage it?
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the shared services energy that's owned by government and controlled regulated by government, to enable shared services. But then,
so if you run out of energy, you call the government, be like, hey, can you top me up?
People would never run out of energy. The limit would be perfect, such that nobody would ever run out.
Okay. I mean, like if you use your household limit, then you could get more from the government based on whatever the government is storing in batteries.
Yeah, but in my ideal world, you would never run out. You would have the perfect amount, so that the government would only have to store for the shared services that it provides. Because you can't have people saying, like individuals saying, I ran out of energy, and it's like, well, why do you get to run out? I didn't run out this month. I want what you got as an extra to top up, have extra for next month. There's probably a proper political term for that, but I don't know it.
Equity, maybe? I don't know. That's such an interesting concept. Like, I think it kind of comes to microgrids.
Yeah.
So kind of, but not quite. But yeah, something really, really interesting. That's such a
Zenobia's not convinced.
No, I'm not convinced. I'm processing, one, but two, I'm also trying to be like, do we already have this? Do we not already have that?
I think it exists on a small scale, like
Yeah.
in Germany and other countries. I don't know many examples, but Spain, for example, is very far away from that.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm also just processing what would that look like on a global scale. Like in South Africa, for example, you just wouldn't get load shedding. Yeah. Yeah. Probably one to think about, but really fascinating.
Great question.
Great answer. Oh my God. So, my final question then, in terms of knowing what you know now, what advice would you give a younger version of Lydia who is at the start of her career?
Another great question. So I think at the start of my career, this is also just a personality trait of mine. I like to have all of the data points available to me so that I can make a decision. So after university, I was again overwhelmed by all the different career options that you can go into with sustainability, and sort of overthinking what would the quote best option be. That's obviously not a thing. So I would tell younger Lydia to chill out, that that everything will work out, that the different jobs that she'll have will be fulfilling and will offer learning and growth in completely different but equally amazing ways, and that something that she doesn't expect is how important the people that she works with will be. That's definitely not something I had in mind when I was just exiting university. So yeah, just to be more open-minded to all the different career paths. This is still something very relevant for present me. Like, I've been in consulting only, and I'm very interested by sustainability policy or NGO work. So maybe next time you interview me, I'll be working at an international policy firm for sustainability. But yeah, just to have faith in the journey, and that you don't need to have all of the data points to make a decision.
I love that. That is incredible. And yes, I even love that we are manifesting a future Lydia on the podcast, sharing more insights. Thank you so very much for today. It's been so incredible. And a part of me is like, I didn't know that about you. And oh my God, you're so smart.
Same. I'm like, I'm definitely going to ask her about this after this recording. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, what a joy. My soul sings. It honestly is. I think I say this all the time, every time on the podcast. Maybe not every time, but I say this quite often. One of the things about the energy industry that I love so much is the people. And I mean, Lydia and my friendship is testament to that. And that's why we've started the podcast, to share that sentiment and share how brilliant and amazing and incredible the people are in the energy industry. And hopefully you will find that too and then join the energy industry. For our next guest, we're chatting to Courtney DeParla on all things transmission. As a self-proclaimed transmission girly, I have to confess, I am equal parts excited but nervous. Hope to see you there. Bye.